Welcome to the first tutorial for the physics tool bag. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk about force objects. Force objects are objects that let you add external forces to rigid bodies. Instead of trying to explain what that means, I'm just going to show you. Let's take a look at the scene that we will be working with. This is a pretty simple scene. There are two piles of boxes. All these boxes have rigid bodies on them. And there is this flying saucer. So for this tutorial, what I'm going to do is use force objects to get this flying saucer to levitate these boxes, because levitating things is just what UFOs do. I am going to create a force object. Force objects can be found under the Game Object menu, under Create Other. Right now, the force object isn't doing anything. All it has on it right now is this Force Manager script. I'm going to go into the Force Manager script in more detail in a later tutorial, but for now you just need to know that it's there and that you need it if you want your force objects to work correctly. Okay, so for force managers to do anything, they need to have force generators on them. And force generators can be found in the component menu under Physics Tool Bag, Force Generators. There are four types of force generators. There's an axis force, a direction force, a drag force, and a point force. And for this tutorial, I'm going to add a directional force. The direction force adds a force along a single direction. And now that I've added the direction force to the force object, you can see it has this green arrow on it. Also, the boxes have these orange arrows on them. The orange arrows represent the force that's being exerted on them by the direction force. Right now, the direction force isn't exerting a lot of force on them, so let's change its magnitude to 10. Now you'll notice that the blue boxes have larger arrows on them than the red boxes. And that is because the blue boxes have a mass of 1 and the red boxes have a mass of 3. Since the red boxes are heavier, the direction force isn't having as much an effect on them. I'm going to run the scene so that we can see how the force object is affecting things. Okay, so you can see that the blue boxes are getting levitated up into the air, but the red boxes are still stuck on the ground. And the reason for this is that since the blue boxes have a lighter mass, they have enough of force applied to them to counteract gravity, but the red boxes are still too heavy. And for this effect, I want everything to kind of be pulled up into the air at the same rate. So how I'm going to handle this is, if you look on the direction force, you can see that the mass mode is set to use mass. If I change that to ignore mass, the direction force affects all rigid bodies in the scene equally, regardless of what their mass is. Now you can see that all the boxes in the scene are levitating up towards the craft, all at the same rate. Now our UFO is levitating the boxes up into the air, but it's still a pretty boring effect. I want to break up the force that's getting applied to these boxes a little bit, to add a little bit of variety. To do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another force generator. This time I'm going to add a point force generator. And so I can demonstrate how the point force generator works. I'm going to set this magnitude to 0. So what the point force does is it creates a force that kind of drags all the rigid bodies in the scene towards it. And another thing I'm going to add to this point force is a fall off. And the fall off does exactly what you'd think. As the force gets closer to a rigid body, that rigid body gets affected more. Then as it moves further away, the effect of it drops off. I'm actually going to give this point force generator a pretty small magnitude. I just want it to break up the motion on the boxes a little bit. So I'm going to change this back to 10. I'm also going to have the point force ignore mass. And I'm going to place this at the bottom of the UFO. Now you can see as the boxes are getting levitated up into the air, they kind of get broken apart a bit before they hit the craft. I'm going to add one more thing to our force object, and that is something called a force mask. Force masks can be found under Component, Physics Tool Bag, Force Masks. There are 4 types of force masks. For this tutorial, I'm going to use a cylindrical force mask. Now that I've added the force mask to our force object, you can see that it's not affecting our boxes anymore. And that is because they lie outside of the force mask. So this force mask, if I make it larger, and we're also going to change its Y position. As soon as the objects intersect our force mask, they get affected again. And force masks are useful for limiting the effect of a force object to a specific area. For this tutorial, I'm just trying to limit the force object to this kind of green beam that's coming off of the craft. So now if we hit play, only these inner boxes are getting levitated up towards the craft. And as the objects are bunching up, some of them are getting pushed outside of the force mask. And when that happens, they're not getting affected by the force object anymore. And then they're falling back to the ground. Another thing you'll notice is that I left this gap between the force mask and the UFO. So what's happening is the objects get pulled up towards the UFO, and then they're pulled outside of the force mask, so then they start to drop back down towards the ground again. And what that does is this adds this interesting little effect where the boxes aren't getting pulled quite all the way towards the craft, but they're kind of floating there in mid-air. That's all I have to show you for this tutorial. It's a pretty simple scene, but it does do a good job of demonstrating what force objects are and what you can do with them. Feel free to watch our other tutorials, or if you have any questions, visit us on our forums. Thank you for watching.